the problem is we as an industry, as a recreation group, there's a primary difference between us and the environmental groups.
Passion.
And well, it's passion and it's pastime. The environmental activists do not plan every weekend to go out and play. They go 4 or 5 times a year. They take a vacation and they backpack somewhere. The rest of the time they spend as activists. Their real hobby in all of this is not so much being out in the wilderness. They just do that for vacation. Their hobby is political activism. That's why they show up for rallies. That's why they show up at the press conference in numbers during the middle of the day on Monday at the state capitol, because that political protest and that political activism to that group is the same as the lure of an ATV trail for us. And that's the real problem, because they want to be in that, and we don't want to be engaged in that. We want to be engaged in enjoying the outdoors. So we have an incompatibility issue that creates a tremendous disadvantage for us. It's a huge disadvantage. You know, I bet state parks probably has some vague notion of how many people belong to an ATV club and how much money they put in. But when you compare it to what kind of revenue the Enviro groups are generating, and they have a money-making machine down there. They basically have turned environmental law into a specialty that brings in top dollar and have revenue sources galore. They raise more from their fundraising because they ply on people's conscience. We still feel guilty about living in a blessed land. We feel guilty about it. It goes back to the guy that was the Italian actor that dressed up like an Indian and ran his canoe down the river and cried when he saw litter in it. Somebody brought up the other day the guy was Italian. He was not really a Native American. But we feel guilty about our prosperity, and we've become intransigent about the solutions instead of just saying, well, let's improve air quality where we can, but let's not cripple ourselves. Let's enjoy the backcountry and have a basic stewardship, but it's kind of this all or nothing mentality that idealists come up with. I mean, just look at the last 8 years in Washington with an administration. That's very idealistic. They do not compromise. It's their way or the highway. That mentality is through that whole movement. So it's not like, okay, well, a little road through here, if you guys keep it to that road, I guess we could live with that. And, maybe reduce the noise on your machines a little bit, and we'd think the trails, we could get along. But it's not like that. It's like, get them out of there. It's just, it's an all or nothing. And so I would bet you that if 2 people were friends and one of them became an environmental activist, and it was known that he was, and the other one was an ATV rider, and they got into a fray on Facebook, I'll bet you that the environmentalist, 5 to 1, would defriend the other guy for the difference of opinion. But here's the thing. There's a money-making machine, and this is an important thing for people to understand, that dates clear back to the 70s. They passed the Equal Access to Justice Act, and this is a big deal, and our community is ignorant of this. And it was a law that was set up primarily for farmers and veterans and people that were being oppressed by government regulation, that if they felt they had a case and they took it to court and they prevailed, standing up to the government that was making their life bad, that the federal government would, from a Justice Department fund, reimburse them for their legal fees if they prevailed. And they set parameters in the original law. It was originally written by 2 Democrats. This was back in the Nixon administration. Dennis DeConcini, who's still around, he's from Arizona, and the senator from New Mexico, Steconcini and Costanza. And he was a senator, and they co-sponsored this EJA bill so that veterans and farmers and small folk would have this opportunity. So they said, okay, you can't make more than, like $600 or $1 million a year, because otherwise you've got the resources to fight it. You can't have a net worth of over $3 million, and it's only for individuals. Both bills were similar. They had a few changes. They sent it to what they call conference committee to reconcile the two bills so that the bills passed by both houses are the same. This happens all the time. Somewhere in those meetings, they added nonprofit organizations, and they excluded them from the financial litmus test and allowed them to seek EJA funds. This has now become a private slush fund for them. Now, the first 4 years of that bill, you could track it. You could see what was happening because it had to be financially reported. And you could see what money they were giving and who they were reimbursing it to, and it was like $4 or $5 million. Then John McCain sponsors the Paperwork Reduction Act in Washington. That passes. Now there's no need to report. So now today, even with FOIA requests, you can't find out how much money they're spending, nor can you find out who they're giving it to, unless you happen to hit the nail right on the head. If you go in and say, I want to know about this court case and what awards were made, and did the fund pay for this, they will give you that one piece of information. So what you now have are these agencies, some of it being required to be paid from their own budgets, some of it coming from a Department of Justice fund that the Congress doesn't know how much is in that fund. They don't know what's put into it. There's no clue as to how much money is actually being paid in these awards. However, you can occasionally get a little nugget. Sierra Club, and I can't remember the year right now, but I have this information, I can dig it out. Sierra Club, in one fiscal year, received $12 million in EJA reimbursements. When they set the law up, they had a set rate that attorneys could charge, which now has been exempted for specialties, and now environmental lawyers have created a specialty out of it, and they are charging not $150 or $200, they're charging $400, $500, $600, $700 per hour, and are getting reimbursed for it. And so that's how these organizations are pulling in all this extra money. They actually make money suing the BLM. The EPA regulations built some of that EJA stuff into the EPA, and so they're even worse. The agencies have to pay on an Endangered Species Act, and there are groups like Wild Earth Guardians. They'll go in and put in a lawsuit petitioning them to list 200 species as endangered at a time, all at once on the same day. Well, the Fish and Wildlife Service has exactly 90 days to respond to all of them. They can't do it. So what happens at the end of 90 days? Boom. Fish and Wildlife has to pay all the attorney's fees to Wild Earth Guardians. They've missed that deadline. But it gets better. Now they have a year to come up with a plan on all 200 species and develop that plan and have it ready for implementation. How can they do it? They don't have the resources. So what happens? A year passes, Wild Earth Guardians files another lawsuit, bam, they get all their lawyer fees paid. This is a money-making machine that's going on. And we sit out here on our ATVs. You know, there have been, this is a funny thing. I talked to a group of ranchers a couple of years ago up in Idaho that had been sued by Western Watersheds Project. And they were a group of independent ranchers. Every one of them, every single one of them that was engaged in there qualified for not making enough money, for being oppressed by the federal government, and being engaged in a protracted lawsuit. And what happens? They apply for EJA reimbursement. The judge denies it. Sure, most guys that ride do not have any clue that this stuff's going on. They have no clue that this stuff's going on. But age is a huge problem. Now, the congressman that just retired from Wyoming, Cynthia Lummis, sponsored legislation to get this handled. And obviously, if it had gone to President Obama's desk, it would have been dead on arrival. And so it never really got anywhere. But it needs to be dealt with, and Congress, Western states Congress, are aware of the problems in the Equal Access to Justice Act. If nothing else, they need to start reporting again, so that you can see through all these secret funds, you can look and say, okay, what has been paid in EJA reimbursements, to whom, how much, for what, so that people like you and I can police what they're doing. But I think if you see that, you'll see that it has turned into a federally subsidized legal fund for environmental non-governmental organizations. And yeah, there's a little bit of veterans work, there's a little bit of coal mine stuff that happens, but by far, it looks like the biggest things are in environmental lawsuits across the country, and most particularly here in the West. So this is just one of those elements that should make people realize they've got to get involved, because while those other people are, do not apply the standard of don't wrestle with a pig because you'll get muddy and the pig enjoys it. You need to, and this is one of the cases where that old saying just doesn't apply, because none of us want to show up at rallies, none of us want to show up and dig into our pocket and give $50 a month. And we don't think it'll make any difference, but the cards are stacked against us. We have to develop in the off-road community. We have to develop a David and Goliath attitude, where you see that you see Goliath in front of you and go, "Oh, this is just too big. What am I going to do?" Well, with the faith of God, the little guy can whip the big guy, and we have to have that attitude. We have to take that extra step to make sure that we are giving the $50 a month, that we're putting the time in to do these things. It's the only way you're going to protect this, short of divesting the federal government of their holdings in the West and giving them back to the states. The current administration that's coming in is all that jazzed about, because they're afraid that they'll just all be sold off, and their family, the Trump family personally, finds great resource and value in public lands. They love to hunt. This is the only place they can go to hunt. So, I think if they took a closer look at how Utah's tried to set the stage for a transfer, they'd probably have a different opinion about it. But right now, I don't think, from what I've been able to tell, they're not all that excited about it.